He never heard the footsteps, only the sound that comes right before a gunshot. Puerto Rico, August, 1994. The air is already heavy with heat as a man finishes his morning jog barefoot on the concrete, sweat still running down his spine. It's the kind of quiet, gated neighborhood where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Palm trees, security fences, the illusion of safety. Then it happens, a faint hiss behind him, almost delicate like metal brushing fabric. Before he can turn, cold steel presses into the base of his skull. A voice whispers, calm and certain, "Don't run. You won't outrun these bullets." Inside the house, his wife and 2 young sons are still asleep, unaware that the next few seconds may decide whether they grow up with a father or a memory. Outside, the man holding the gun isn't angry, isn't shouting. He's a professional. This is routine. What he doesn't know is that the man on his knees isn't just an FBI agent. For the past 6 years, this man has lived a lie so complete it fooled some of the most violent criminals on the planet. He moved more than $1 billion worth of cocaine across the Caribbean. He earned the trust of killers, financiers, and cartel bosses who execute people for less than a wrong look. Every shipment he touched was secretly seized by the government. 3 days ago, his work led to 52 federal indictments that shattered an entire criminal network. And now, the bill has come due. In this moment, unarmed, exposed seconds from death, the question is no longer how deep he went undercover. The question is whether anyone can ever truly come back from a life lived inside the cartel. By the late 1980s, the United States wasn't losing the war on drugs in dramatic fashion. It was losing it quietly, statistically, almost politely. Year after year, federal agents seized tons of cocaine, thousands of pounds stacked in evidence rooms, photographed, cataloged, destroyed, yet the streets never ran dry. Prices barely moved. Distribution routes adapted overnight. For every flashy bust shown on the evening news, the cartels treated it as a cost of doing business. The truth, uncomfortable and rarely spoken aloud, was this law enforcement was fighting symptoms, not structure. The men with guns and speedboats were replaceable. The system behind them was not. Inside federal conference rooms, away from cameras and press releases, a harder realization set in. You cannot arrest your way out of an industrialized criminal economy. You cannot scare an organization that budgets for loss. And you cannot dismantle an empire by touching only its edges. If the government wanted to do real damage, lasting damage, it would have to see the cartel the way the cartel saw itself, as a business, a logistics machine, a financial organism designed to survive pressure. That meant abandoning familiar rules. It meant no quick wins, no timelines that fit election cycles, no guarantees of safety. It meant placing a single human being inside the machinery and letting it close around him. Not as an informant wired for sound, not as a temporary asset, but as a long-term participant whose credibility would be tested by men who solved doubt with bullets. The strategy was brutally simple and morally unsettling. Build a criminal so convincing that criminals would trust him with their lives, their money, their secrets. This was not acting. Acting breaks under stress. This required erasure. The agent selected would have to shed his habits, his language, even his sense of time. Real traffickers don't rush. They don't explain. They don't wait for permission. One hesitation, one trace of institutional thinking, and the illusion would collapse instantly. The Bureau understood the stakes. If the operation succeeded, it could expose not just shipments, but the arteries of money that kept the cartel alive. If it failed, there would be no rescue, no extraction, no heroic ending. There would only be a disappearance written off, quietly buried under classified files. This was the moment the line shifted from enforcement to infiltration, from arrest to transformation. And once crossed, there would be no clean way back. The moment the operation began, his real name stopped meaning anything. It wasn't ceremonious and it wasn't dramatic. There was no line crossed on a map, no symbolic burning of documents. It happened quietly, the way identity erosion always does. One day he was an FBI agent with a badge, colleagues, and a future measured in promotions and pensions. The next, he was Manny, an independent smuggler with no visible past, no clear loyalties, and no margin for error. The cartel did not greet him with suspicion or interrogation. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they tested him with absence. Meetings were scheduled and then canceled without explanation. Contacts sent him to cafes where he sat alone for hours, watched from unseen angles, judged not by what he said but by what he did when nothing happened. Did he fidget? Did he look at his watch? Did he make a call? He shouldn't. Patience, he learned quickly, was currency. Real traffickers did not operate on anyone else's clock. Then came the travel. Endless, disorienting, deliberately inefficient. 1 week, Panama the next. Honduras, then Puerto Rico, Boston, New York, places chosen less for logistics than for pressure. He slept in cheap motels that smelled of bleach and stale smoke, never sure who might be listening through thin walls. Dead drops were moved at the last minute. Rendezvous locations were changed mid-route. In one warehouse, he waited in silence for hours, convinced someone was watching from the shadows, evaluating whether fear would leak through his posture. In another city, a scarred man said nothing at all, just stared, measuring how long Manny could sit under that gaze without filling the silence. Each encounter was a vote. 75 men across the hemisphere, each with the authority to decide whether Manny was legitimate or disposable. The brilliance of the system was its cruelty. A law enforcement officer lives by structure briefings, deadlines, extraction plans. The cartel stripped all of that away. There was no handler to consult, no safe word, no pause button. Once Manny stepped into their world, everything depended on instinct and improvisation. Over time, the performance stopped feeling like a performance. He spoke faster, laughed louder, spent money with the careless confidence expected of someone who believed himself untouchable. He learned when to boast and when to stay silent, when to insult and when to flatter, how to curse in a way that sounded natural rather than rehearsed. More unsettling was what happened in private. On calls home, his voice carried a subtle swagger that made his wife uneasy, as if someone else were borrowing his mouth. Alone at night, staring at his reflection under flickering motel lights, he struggled to recognize where Manny ended and the agent began. The stress was constant, grinding, cumulative. Every conversation carried the weight of consequence. Every smile could be a mistake. Yet the deeper he went, the clearer one truth became: pretending to be Manny wasn't enough. The cartel didn't trust costumes or backstories. They trusted authenticity. To survive, he had to let parts of Manny become real. That was the tightrope embrace, the role enough to convince killers you belonged, but not so completely that you forgot why you were there. When the whispers finally came, Manny's solid, Manny's one of us, there was no celebration, just a chill, because earning their trust meant he had succeeded. And success meant he was now far deeper inside the machine than he had ever planned to go. Trust in the cartel was never expressed through praise or reassurance. It arrived as weight. When the offer finally came, it didn't sound like an invitation, but a test disguised as opportunity. Move a load so large it would bind him permanently to the organization if he succeeded, and mark him for death if he failed. Nearly 6,600 pounds of cocaine, close to $500 million on the street, were scheduled to change hands in a single night. Not in a warehouse or on a runway, but in open water under a moonless sky. This was the point of no return. The planning unfolded in fragments, deliberately incomplete, forcing Manny to fill in gaps the way a real smuggler would, by intuition, not procedure. He coordinated boats and crews while silently aligning with federal teams positioned just beyond sight, every step balanced on the edge of exposure. On the night itself, the ocean swallowed sound and light alike. Engines idled, radios went quiet. Then the sky answered. Aircraft engines thudded overhead low and fast, and the first bundle slammed into the water with a force that felt like a detonation. Another followed, then another. The sea erupted with violent splashes as bales the size of refrigerators crashed down, each impact capable of capsizing a boat or killing a man outright. Manny shouted orders, cursed, laughed too loudly, performing triumph, while adrenaline threatened to crack his composure. In the dark, unseen eyes could have been watching, measuring his reaction to sudden chaos. He hauled soaked bundles aboard, muscles, burning fingers numb, every movement choreographed to look greedy rather than precise. Hours blurred into a single stretch of exertion and fear as the boats rode lower in the water, heavy with cargo and consequence. When the last bale was secured, there was no relief, only the next risk. They raced for shore along a route chosen to look reckless, but was secretly cleared skirting patrols that had been instructed to look away at exactly the right moments. By dawn, the transfer was complete. Trucks swallowed the cargo, doors slammed shut. Law enforcement surged in from all sides. In the confusion, Manny played his final role of the night, furious, panicked, betrayed by bad luck. To the cartel, the loss was operational, not personal. The verdict was unmistakable. Manny had delivered. And in that success lay the real escalation. Because the reward for surviving a job like that wasn't safety. It was promotion, access, a deeper seat at the table. He had proven he could be trusted with an empire's ransom, and now the organization would trust him with something far more dangerous than cocaine, its future. After the smugglers came, the men who never touched the product. They didn't raise their voices or flash weapons. They didn't need to. Power, Manny learned, had evolved. It wore tailored suits and spoke in measured sentences, and it understood that cocaine itself was just inventory. The real weapon was liquidity. This was the cartel's inner sanctum, the financial engine that turned violence into permanence. Manny was invited not because he was charming, but because he had proven he could move value without leaving fingerprints. Meetings shifted from docks and airstrips to offices and secure phone lines. The conversations changed too. No more bravado, no more jokes, just numbers, routes, and timing. He was introduced to a system designed to make dirty money indistinguishable from clean shell companies, layered across jurisdictions, trade-based laundering that hid cash inside shipments of electronics, and produce offshore accounts that blurred ownership until responsibility dissolved. Then there was the voice. Calm, educated, unhurried. The man who called himself the Black Bull didn't threaten Manny with rage or theatrics. He stated policy. "We'll make a lot of money together," he said almost warmly. "But if I smell something wrong, I can reach you anywhere." It was the most chilling kind of menace because it assumed inevitability. Under his direction, Manny laundered tens of millions, documenting each step in silence, watching as the line between criminal enterprise and legitimate commerce thinned to the point of invisibility. Banks processed transfers without questions. Corporations closed deals without curiosity. The machinery of the legal world absorbed cartel money the way a body absorbs oxygen. The deeper Manny went, the more unsettling the picture became. This wasn't a rogue operation on the margins. It was infrastructure, a global system resilient enough to survive seizures, arrests, even wars. When federal prosecutors finally moved, the impact was seismic. 52 indictments dropped at once, ripping through the network's middle layers and exposing the arteries that fed it. Plea deals followed. Silence spread. And inside the underworld, a colder logic took hold. Manny's name was missing from the charges. That absence said everything. There had been a traitor close enough to touch everything product, money, people, and live. For the men who governed by fear and balance sheets, betrayal wasn't emotional. It was an equation, and the answer inevitably required blood. The assassination attempt was not fueled by anger or revenge. It was procedure. In the cartel's world, retaliation wasn't emotional. It was structural, a way to restore balance after betrayal. When the hit came, it came quietly, efficiently, as if closing an overdue account. Manny survived not because the danger had passed, but because in a single chaotic moment, he reacted faster than the logic meant to erase him. The shooter fled, wounded and silent, carrying the message back into the shadows. Officially, the incident was reduced to a headline about a home invasion gone wrong. Unofficially, everyone who mattered understood exactly what it was proof that the long arm had reached, even if it failed to close its grip. The operation itself was declared a historic success. Dozens of convictions followed. Smuggling routes collapsed. Financial pipelines were disrupted. Inside federal agencies, the case became a template for a new doctrine. Follow the money fracture, the system let the violence starve. But there was no line item in the final report for what remained inside the man who had lived the lie. 6 years undercover had reshaped him in ways no debriefing could undo. He had learned to think like people who solved problems with cruelty, to speak without revealing fear, to live without the comfort of truth. Birthdays were missed. Relationships were strained by secrets that could never be shared. Even after retirement, safety felt provisional, conditional. The mastermind who ordered his death was never caught, never named with certainty, never brought into the light. That unresolved presence lingered like a pressure change in the air. Manny returned to being himself, but not entirely. When you spend years inside darkness, part of it comes home with you. Every unexpected sound, every unfamiliar face carried an echo of that morning in Puerto Rico. He had dismantled a criminal empire from the inside and lived to tell the story, but survival did not mean closure. It meant learning to exist with the knowledge that some enemies don't disappear, they wait. And that is the final cost of walking into the machinery of evil. To break it, you may shut it down, but the shadow it casts never fully lets you go. This story isn't just about crime or courage. It's a warning about what happens when systems grow so powerful that stopping them requires someone to disappear inside the very thing they're trying to destroy. It reminds us that real battles aren't always loud. They're slow, psychological, and often invisible. And that the cost of doing the right thing is sometimes paid long after the mission ends. If you believe stories like this matter, if you care about truth beneath the headlines and the human cost behind national security, help this reach more people. Like this video, share it with someone who values depth over noise, and subscribe for more investigative stories that don't look away when things get uncomfortable.